and it feels good.
And then, how often do you come here?
Oh, it varies. Once or twice a week.
So do you live here in PG?
Carmel.
Carmel.
Yeah.
I think that's good. Do you guys have any
Um,
We ran out of questions. Great interview. Stunned.
Easy.
Come on, we need more questions.
I'm ready. How long have you lived here locally?
Oh, 35 years.
Wow. So have you been coming here ever since you were a little lad?
A little lad? I'm very old. Quite old. Is that the amazing thing, which if you get into mythology, is like in Carmel, there's a whole bunch of these metaphysical groups. Yoga, spirituality. Dora D'Angelo was there. She's dead now. She was the Lady of the Angels, and her group would introduce you to your personal angels. And the area is loaded with white magic.
What? This area?
Yeah, you get into the various groups of spirituality. My God, there's Kundalini Yoga if you want it. My God, there's all of this.
What's the difference between black magic and white magic?
Well, white magic would be for positive outcomes for humanity.
Okay. Oh yeah, so it's good.
And
It's
black
positive.
magic would be probably more centered on personal gain in some way. Is that it's kind of like...
And it sounds evil too, black magic.
Well, evil, you could say, evil is kind of an odd word.
Yeah.
It implies
Animals are friendly.
a whole bunch of things.
Say that.
The other is
Come here.
There's a little what's that little squirrel?
Felton, which are up there.
Yeah.
Is that every killer that went down into Santa Cruz came down Highway 9. And if you go up there, it looks beautiful, the deep forest and all that. And if you stop and you start to get into these towns, they'll tell you, don't walk alone in these woods. So the Indians, which predate the community up there, had a saying. They said, hunt all you want in these woods, but don't sleep here. They're filled with evil spirits.
Wow. So what woods are those?
Go up Highway 9 to pick any community and pick the entire woods up. The amazing thing is that when you get into the communities, the people that are attracted there and the groups that are there, you've got biker gangs, amphetamine labs, the runaways, you've got black covens, and a high amount of suspicion to strangers.
Wow.
So
do you know any more history about this specific location? Kind of like, because we're trying to research Lover's Point,
oh yeah, sure.
So like any other...
Well, there's a lot of fun stuff. The way it worked was this. For about 3 summers, the Methodists came here, and they had tents.
Yeah.
And Jack's...
On the beach? Like...
Oh, no. See all these little houses
like in the
around
town?
here?
Yeah.
Those are 30 by 60 lots. 30 feet by 60. And Jack's of Jack's Peak said he owned them. And he sold them eventually. But saying that he owned them, he would rent them to the Methodists from New York that would come here, and they would erect tents, and they did what was called a Chautauqua. Being in New York, education was down, so they would have people that would lecture, and you could go to the lectures. They got so big.
So it was like a schooling kind of thing?
It would be a big tent, it would be a school, and you could lecture on anything you wanted.
Wow.
So where it started was in New York and in Chautauqua, which is Indian word, which means take the fish to the people. So, which is the education. So they started taking their Chautauquas to different towns and set up tents. The Methodists decided to come out here because it was a Methodist church, and they set up tents in the summer, and they did their Chautauqua, such as Chautauqua Hall, which is up there. About 3 summers.
It's still named Chautauqua Hall?
Oh yeah, it's one of the buildings.
Sweet.
So education went up. I'm talking about the 1800s.
Yeah.
The Chautauquas died, and they stopped coming. So Jack's had all these lots, and he put them up for sale. They're 30 feet by 60 feet. And in the first 2 years, 80 to 85% were sold. And this is where it gets interesting. Women's suffrage didn't occur in California until 1911. Previous to that, women were property. So if you were married, your name wouldn't even be on the deed. So we're going to about 1880, 1886. 80-85% of the lots are sold to married and single women, and no husband on the deed.
Wow.
And they were the first ones that built the actual houses, the wooden houses.
So women?
Yes.
Wow.
And if you walk around, there's little historical plaques. It lists the original builder, the original owner.
Mm.
They're all women.
Wow.
There were 3 boarding houses that were here, only for women. This is a matriarchal city,
That's
built by
awesome.
women, controlled by women.
That's awesome.
Never knew that.
So is that why it's called Lover's Point?
Why it's called Lover's Point was it was named that in the beginning, and Elmery Dyke, a very old patron of Pacific Grove, tried to introduce that it should be, it would be, it always has been called Lovers of Jesus Christ Point.
Wow.
But she made that up, and never was, and no one bought it, and it died about 1965.4 months. But she was a good Methodist, and up at the top where Great Chili is, which is a big building up there, is that was a huge Victorian Methodist church. And
You're talking about this one straight ahead up there?
if you go up to the lighthouse,
Oh, okay.
there's a restaurant, and above
okay.
it has timeshares. And the Methodists decided that they wanted to be closer to Pebble Beach, where the real money was, because there's nothing going on here. So they built their church out there, and they let this church basically rot. So eventually it was destroyed and left an empty lot.
Oh.
And that eventually in the 60s, you had all the sardines gone, and nobody ever asked. They said, like they were canning all these sardines. Can you imagine anybody in the U.S. Army eating sardines? No one ever thinks, well, where were all these sardines going during the war? To the Nordic fighters. Yes, you had Norway and you had Sweden, and all these sardines, which they love, were going to them. They weren't going to U.S. troops. And
You mean like they were like catching the sardines but then shipping them somewhere else, or like?
no, during the World War II, is that they were supplying the Nordic countries with tons of sardines because
Of our sardines?
yeah, they're all fished out of this bay, and then the sardines they said were overfished, and they were gone. And that may or may not be true because they actually disappear every 100 years.
Wow.
It's a natural cycle of that, and they're back instantly in force. So when the sardines went away into World War II, is that basically this is a ghost town. Is that there's no business
Yeah.
and there's no work, and the town was filled with those who didn't want to chase a corporate dream or aren't chasing money, who aren't on the career. So you can figure what was going on in the 60s. Is that the whole place, complete outlaw town, filled with hippies.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what was here. That operated until about 1984. And you could rent any one of these houses for $300 a month. Your
Wow.
room rent was $60. So they repackaged as valuable coastal property. And they created the illusion in '84 in selling property back and forth. Personally, I'd like to get $40,000 for my house. And they, oh no, we'll list it as $100. So they created this game until people came in and started buying the houses. And once the wheels started turning, then you had the yuppies coming in the late '80s.
Oh, what? I've heard that term before, but what exactly is a yuppie?
Well, let's see. I've forgotten the exact terminology, how it breaks down, but it's a sort of a Johnny on the make corporate guy. Is that they're in to make a lot of money. They were making a lot of money. Young, tough corporate guys
All right.
out here, and this.
So they started buying everything?
Buying or renting, they would come down and say, I'll give you $3,000 to kick her out so I can rent the place. And so, like one lady had a 17-year relationship between the owners and the tenant, and they said, yes. And that started the whole
Wow.
change. You see, the people who owned these buildings were living off of the workers, the tenants. So actually, the ones who had more money were the tenants, and the restaurants like Tilly Gord's were filled every night because you had a lot of fluid cash.
Yeah.
So anybody that was here, because it's dead, would turn their house over, say, to one of the realtors for property management, and go somewhere else to make some real money. So property management, about in the 80s, woke up that they controlled hundreds and hundreds of houses, and they were in charge. So they said, let's raise the rent. We get more rent, we get a higher price on the house. And that was one away from, why don't we just fantasize house prices and see who comes in? And so you can take a fast ride through the 60s, what was going on here, which is absolute insanity, all the way to Big Sur. Carmel had a different view on the traffic from Los Angeles to San Francisco, the hippies coming through Big Sur. And so in Carmel, everywhere you could sit, they glued a pointy rock, which was their answer to the hippies. So once the game had started here, you can follow it through the yuppies in the 80s, you can go into the 90s, the crash in the market, and then about 2001, you get the total insanity of the U.S. gone into greed. And where we're at today, this is a village, and it's about to crash. All this real estate's about to crash. And I told people, I said, PG's got two ways to go. You can go into cooperation, because there used to be nothing but downtown gardens, and people had gardens here, and they would share, do all sorts of cooperative things. There were people that raised canaries and odd ducks and birds, and you could pay your mortgage with that. So I said they either go into cooperation or they go into piracy. And in cooperation, everybody gets saved. In piracy, it's last man standing.
Yeah.
And we are now into piracy. It's last man standing.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you very much.